This story is titled, Parents Secretly Used My Credit Card for Years and Ruined My Life. Later, I found out my family secret and it was shocking. Hey everyone. Before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. I've never been one to put my personal life out there, but my friend kept telling me I should share what I've been through. He said my story might help someone else going through something similar. So here I am. Growing up, I always had this nagging feeling that I didn't really belong. My parents weren't exactly what you'd call warm or loving. They took care of the basics, a roof over my head, clothes, food, but that's where it stopped. Anytime I questioned them or didn't do exactly what they wanted, they'd throw it back in my face. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? It was their go-to line for everything. When I got a bad grade, when I couldn't afford to chip in for a family expense with my part-time job money, or when I simply disagreed with them, it didn't matter. That line was their trump card, and it worked. For years, it kept me in check. But even as a kid, I noticed things that didn't make sense. For one, I didn't look like anyone else in the family. My dad was tall with blonde hair and blue eyes, while my mom was a petite redhead. Then there was me, dark-haired and brown-eyed, always being asked by strangers if I was adopted. When I brought it up, my mom would laugh it off, saying something about distant relatives and genetics. It didn't add up, but I was a kid, so I didn't press the issue. As I got older, the unfair treatment became more obvious. My parents always found ways to criticize me, no matter what I did. When I got in trouble at school, they acted like it was a reflection of their parenting failures. If I forgot to do a chore or got a C on a test, it turned into a lecture about how I was wasting their sacrifices. By the time I was a teenager, I'd learned to keep my head down and avoid drawing attention to myself. It didn't stop the constant criticisms, but it made life slightly more bearable. When I graduated high school, I had dreams of going away to college. I wanted to get as far from them as possible, but financially, it wasn't realistic. My part-time job didn't pay enough to cover tuition and living expenses, and I didn't want to take on massive student loans. My parents offered to let me stay at home, but there was a catch. I had to pay rent. "You're an adult now," my dad said. "We're not running a free hotel?" I didn't argue. I wasn't a freeloader, and I didn't want to give them another reason to hold something over my head. So I paid them rent every month, even though I was juggling a full course load and a part-time job. Looking back, it's obvious they were just milking me for extra cash. My rent money didn't go toward household expenses. It went toward my mom's shopping sprees and my dad's weekend golf trips. Meanwhile, I was scraping by, eating ramen noodles and wondering if I'd made a mistake staying there. Even back then, I noticed how they always seemed to have money for ridiculous things. My mom would come home with overpriced handbags and designer shoes, while my dad would boast about upgrading his latest gadgets. It didn't add up, but I figured they were just irresponsible with their finances. It wasn't until much later that I realized they might not have been spending their own money at all. Everything changed when I was looking for my birth certificate to finish some job paperwork. My mom had always kept important stuff in a filing cabinet in the office, so I figured it'd be in there. I started going through the folders, and that's when I saw it. A thick envelope with my name on it. I opened it, and there they were. Adoption papers. My heart started racing. I read through them, trying to process what I was seeing. My biological parents' names were on there. Names I'd never heard before. I sat there for what felt like hours, rereading the papers. I wasn't angry about being adopted, at least not yet. What hit me was the fact that they'd lied to me my entire life. When I confronted my mom about it later that night, her reaction made everything worse. She didn't apologize or explain why they kept it from me. Instead, she got defensive. "We gave you a better life," she said. "Your real family didn't even want you." Her words cut deep. It wasn't just the lie, it was the way she used my adoption as a weapon, like I owed her for saving me. I didn't even know what to say. My dad chimed in, saying I was being ungrateful. Ungrateful? For being lied to my whole life? I couldn't take it anymore. I packed a bag and left that night, crashing at my friend's place. I didn't know where I was going or what I was going to do, but I knew I couldn't stay there. The next few days were a blur. I'd taken just enough clothes to last me a week, and whatever cash I had saved from my part-time job. My friend, let's call him Jason, was great about letting me crash on his couch, but I could tell it wasn't a long-term solution. Meanwhile, I couldn't stop thinking about the adoption papers. Who were my biological parents? Why did they give me up? And why did my adoptive parents lie about it? I didn't know if I wanted to confront them again or just cut ties completely. On Jason's couch, I replayed every interaction I'd ever had with my parents. The time my dad refused to let me go on a school trip because I'd accidentally left the TV on. The time my mom yelled at me for spending my part-time job money on a new pair of shoes instead of family groceries. They'd always acted like I was a burden, like every little thing I did came with a debt I had to repay. The realization hit me like a brick. I was never really their son. I was a responsibility they tolerated, not someone they loved. After moving out, the betrayal of finding out about my adoption was bad enough, but the way my parents reacted made it worse. They didn't even try to apologize or explain themselves. Instead, they acted like I was the problem, like I should have just been grateful and moved on. But I couldn't move on. The more I thought about it, the more questions I had. The anger was constant, bubbling under the surface. But it wasn't just about the adoption anymore. It was everything. Years of being treated like I was a burden, like I owed them for basic necessities, all came flooding back. One night, I was lying awake on Jason's couch, staring at the ceiling. I kept replaying all the times my parents had been weird about money. They'd guilt me into pitching in for bills, even when I barely had enough to cover my own expenses. Meanwhile, they show off new purchases. None of it ever made sense. How could they complain about money being tight while living comfortably off my hard work? The thought gnawed at me, and I couldn't let it go. I was sitting there thinking about the situation I was in. A memory flashed back to me. It was just after I had turned 18, and my parents had asked me to co-sign some paperwork. They said it was for something minor, a family phone plan or insurance paperwork, and they needed my help since I was now an adult. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now it all started to make sense. That's when it hit me. What if there was more to it? What if the money they were spending wasn't just theirs? I decided to check my credit report. I didn't even know how to do it, but after some quick Googling, I found a free credit check website. I entered my information, half expecting nothing out of the ordinary, but when the results came back, my stomach dropped. As I stared at the screen, scrolling through the unfamiliar accounts and loans, there were credit cards I'd never opened, loans I'd never taken out, and even a car lease. My credit score was a disaster. At first, I thought there had to be some kind of mistake. Maybe it was identity theft, but not from them. Then I started looking at the details, and everything clicked. The dates, the purchases, they lined up with things I'd seen in the house growing up. The TV they bought for the family, my dad's new car, even the furniture in the living room. It wasn't a mistake. It was them. They'd faked my signature. They'd used my name, my identity, to open accounts and take out loans for years. It all made sense now, and it made me sick. I felt like I couldn't breathe. This wasn't just a lie about my adoption. This was a fraud. They had destroyed my financial future without me even knowing it. Jason must have noticed something was wrong because he came over and asked what happened. I showed him the report, my hands shaking as I scrolled through the list of accounts. He let out a low whistle. "Dude, this is bad," he said. "You need to talk to a lawyer." I nodded. Where would I even start? The people who were supposed to take care of me had stolen from me. They'd lied to me, manipulated me, and now I was left to clean up their mess. But as much as it hurt, I knew Jason was right. If I didn't stand up for myself, who would? The next day, I started gathering evidence. I went through every email, text, and financial document I could find. I made a list of all the fraudulent accounts and cross-referenced them with the things my parents had bought over the years. The pattern was undeniable. They'd used me as their personal piggy bank, racking up debt in my name while I was still in high school. Even my part-time job money had gone toward paying bills I hadn't even known were mine. Each new discovery was another confirmation of how deliberate their actions had been. Once I had a clearer picture of the damage, I knew I couldn't face this alone. The next step was finding a lawyer. I didn't have a ton of money, but I found someone who specialized in cases like mine. She listened to everything and said I had a strong case. She was shocked but not surprised. She explained that we could go after them for identity theft and fraud, and possibly file a civil suit to recover damages. It felt overwhelming, but I knew I had to see it through. She said, "Unfortunately, this happens more often than you'd think," she said. "But you have a strong case. We can pursue this." Hearing her say that was like a weight lifting off my shoulders. I wasn't going to let them get away with it, but gathering the evidence was just the beginning. Filing the police report was the next step, and it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. It felt surreal. Not because I felt guilty, I didn't, but because it made everything so real. My parents weren't just bad at parenting, they were criminals. The officer who took my report was professional, but clearly uncomfortable. It's always tough when it's family, he said. Tough didn't even begin to cover it. The police opened an investigation, and my lawyer helped me file a civil suit. The moment I filed the police report, I knew there was no going back. I wasn't nervous or second-guessing my decision. I wanted to protect myself, yes, but I also wanted revenge. They had spent years dictating how I should feel, how I should act, and what I supposedly owed them. Not anymore. This time, I was the one in charge, and they were going to face the consequences of their actions. When I got back to Jason's, I told him about the report. He was supportive, as always, but I could tell he was worried about me. "You sure you're ready for this?" he asked. "It's going to get messy." "It's already messy," I replied. "But I'm not backing down." Over the next few weeks, things escalated quickly. The police opened an investigation, and my lawyer helped me send cease and desist letters to the creditors. I had to make endless phone calls, explaining the situation to skeptical customer service reps who didn't seem to care. It was exhausting, but every step felt like progress. I wasn't just cleaning up the mess they put me in. I was reclaiming my life. Within a week, they were at my parents' house, questioning them about everything. I imagined their faces when the officers arrived, how they must have scrambled to come up with excuses. It wasn't long before my phone rang. My mom's voice on the other end was frantic, almost desperate. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice cracking. "We're your parents. We took care of you. You're going to ruin everything." I didn't hesitate. "You've already ruined everything," I said, my voice cold. "You lied to me. You stole from me. You don't get to play the victim now." Her tone shifted instantly, like a switch had flipped. The fake remorse was gone, replaced by anger. "You're an ungrateful little brat," she snapped. I hung up without another word. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me anymore. The guilt trips, the emotional blackmail, none of it worked on me now. I was done playing their games. In the end, filing that report was the best decision I've ever made. It didn't fix everything overnight, but it set me on a path to reclaiming my life. My parents had taken so much from me, but they couldn't take my determination. I wasn't going to let them define me anymore. I spent the next few days looking through everything. I took photos of the adoption papers, printed out my credit report, and started digging through old emails and texts. While digging through old emails and financial records, I discovered a mortgage statement in my name, a house I'd never owned or even seen. My parents had taken out a loan under my identity, claiming it was for my future investment. They even forged my signature on the paperwork. This wasn't just carelessness. It was a calculated effort to use my name as their financial scapegoat. The payments had long since defaulted, leaving me with yet another financial mess to clean up. The scale of their deceit was staggering. Plot. But now it was clear this was part of a larger pattern of manipulation. A few days later, they showed up at Jason's apartment. I didn't even need to see them to know they were there. My mom's voice was loud enough to hear through the door, alternating between sobbing and shouting. My dad's tone was colder, more calculated. "You're tearing the family apart," he said, as if their actions hadn't already done that. My mom was begging, her voice desperate. "Fix this," she cried. "Make it right. We can work this out." I didn't even open the door. Instead, I called the cops. Watching them get escorted off the property was surreal. My dad was furious, shouting something about how I was ruining their lives. My mom was still crying, pleading with the officers to let her talk to me. But I didn't care. They weren't my problem anymore. When the court dates rolled around, I came prepared. I wasn't about to let their lawyers spin this into some sob story about how they were just trying to help the family. There was no way they were going to twist this around and make themselves look like the victims. The evidence was undeniable. I had the credit reports, the adoption papers, the forged documents, and the messages from my mom practically admitting to what they'd done. It all painted a clear picture. They had used me for years, treating me like a resource instead of a person. Their lawyer tried to argue that it was all a misunderstanding, that they hadn't intended to harm me. It was laughable. The judge wasn't buying it, and neither was I. My parents weren't careless, they were deliberate. They knew exactly what they were doing, and they thought they could get away with it. When the verdict was read, I felt a surge of satisfaction. They were ordered to pay restitution, and were found guilty of multiple counts of identity theft and fraud. Watching their faces as the judge handed down the sentence was a moment I'll never forget. My dad's smug confidence was gone, replaced by disbelief. My mom looked like she was about to cry, but for once I didn't care. They thought they could use me, manipulate me, and ruin my future without consequences. They were wrong. It wasn't just about the money or the guilty verdict. It was about standing up for myself and proving that they couldn't control me anymore. For years, they had made me feel small, powerless. like I owed them for every little thing. But now, the tables had turned. They were the ones who had to answer for their actions, and I was the one holding them accountable. That's the kind of justice they never saw coming. When everything finally started to settle down with my adoptive parents being held accountable, I decided I needed to close one more chapter in my life. I had to find out the truth about my biological parents. Not knowing who they were or why they gave me up had been eating at me since the moment I found those adoption papers. It wasn't just curiosity. It was about understanding where I came from and finding something real after all the lies. At first, I wasn't even sure where to start. I had their names from the adoption papers, but that wasn't much to go on. I tried looking them up online, but there were too many people with the same names, and nothing really matched up. Eventually, I decided to do one of those DNA tests. You know, the ones where you spit in a tube, and they tell you your ancestry and connect you to relatives. It was the best starting point I had, so I went for it. The results took weeks to come back. When they finally did, I got a few matches with distant relatives. Nothing close, but it was enough to start piecing things together. I reached out to a couple of them, explaining my situation. Most people were kind of hesitant, which I understood, but one person, a third cousin I think, was willing to help. She said she'd heard stories about a relative who had a baby that was adopted out years ago. She didn't have all the details, but she pointed me toward a family that might be connected to my biological mom. From there, I focused on online searches and public records. After a couple of weeks, I found someone who seemed like a match. For the sake of privacy, I'll call Karen, and she lived in a small town about 3 hours away from me. I sent her a carefully worded message, explaining who I was and what I'd found. Then I waited. A week later, she responded. She confirmed that she was my biological mother and said she'd been waiting for this day for years. She told me she had tried to keep me, but things were complicated back then. She was young, barely out of high school, and in a tough spot financially. She said a social worker convinced her and my biological father to sign adoption papers, saying it was just a temporary situation and they'd be able to get me back later. By the time they realized the adoption was permanent, it was too late. Her message pissed me off. Not at her, but at the system. If what she said was true, she was manipulated just like I was. This wasn't some oops situation. It was another example of people taking advantage of someone because they could. I wasn't about to let this slide. I asked for details and she gave them to me without hesitation. She even sent pictures of herself and my biological father from when they were younger. It was very odd to see people who actually looked like me. After a few weeks of messages, Karen asked if I'd be willing to meet in person. I agreed. We decided to meet at a diner halfway between where we both lived. When I walked in and saw her sitting at a booth, I felt vindicated. She stood up and hugged me as soon as I got to the table. It wasn't emotional for me. It was confirmation. This was the woman who was supposed to raise me before the system ripped us apart. We sat there for hours, going over everything. She told me about my biological father, who had passed away a few years ago. She said he'd carried guilt about the adoption for years, and hoped I'd find them one day. Karen also told me about her life after the adoption, how she'd struggled to move forward, but never forgot about me. She even showed me a scrapbook she'd kept with pictures, notes, and even the hospital bracelet from when I was born. It wasn't sentimental for me. It was proof of how much she'd thought about me despite what happened. Meeting Karen wasn't about healing or closure for me. It was about getting answers and setting the record straight. For years, I'd been lied to and treated like I was nothing more than a tool. This meeting confirmed what I already suspected. My adoptive parents weren't saviors. They were manipulators who used me to serve their own selfish needs. What I didn't expect, though, was what came next. Karen mentioned that she had kept in touch with the social worker who had facilitated my adoption. Apparently, this person had known the truth about my adoptive parents all along. They'd seen red flags but looked the other way, choosing convenience over doing the right thing. She offered to reach out to them, and I agreed. I wanted to know why someone would knowingly put me in that situation. A week later, I got an email from the social worker. It was full of excuses and half-hearted apologies, claiming they had no choice and were only following orders. But their words just fueled my anger. It was a pattern I'd seen too many times. People exploiting others and then hiding behind systems or authority to avoid accountability. I didn't respond to their email. I didn't need to. Their weak excuses only strengthened my resolve. Since then, Karen and I have kept in touch. I've even met some of my biological relatives, including a couple of half-siblings I didn't know I had. They've been welcoming, which is more than I ever got from my adoptive parents. It's not about building some fairy tale. In the end, I've completely cut ties with my adoptive parents. They faced additional charges and longer sentences. Every month I get a restitution check from them. It's not enough to undo the damage they've done, but it's a reminder that they're paying for what they did. I've used that money to start rebuilding my life. Each one is a reminder of what they took from me and what I've had to fight to get back. They lost their house, their reputation, everything. Now they had to live with the consequences. So, what's next for me? I'm going to keep saving up for my goal of owning my own home outright. No loans, no debts tied to my name. It might take a while, but I've got time and a plan. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm in control of my future. Without my parents dragging me down, I finally have the chance to build something real. It's not flashy or dramatic, but it's mine, and that's all that matters.